Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for No Dollar Left Behind, organizing a community-based approach to FAFSA completion. We're excited to have today's webinar to give you all more information about approaches that some partners in Florida are taking to completing the FAFSA. Just give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. You should be seeing the right view of your screen now. For those of you who are new to FCAN, welcome. My name is Amy Bullock. I'm FCAN's Community Engagement and Programs Coordinator. You can see my contact information there. And on today's panel, we are thrilled to have Jessica Manchette, who is the Senior Director of Program Initiatives at Champions for Learning. She is also involved with the 2 LCANs in Southwest Florida, Future Ready Collier, which is part of the Future Makers Coalition. And then we have Doug Griesenauer, and Doug, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, but Doug is the Director of Workforce Development and Financial Stability Initiatives at United Way Suncoast.
Got my name perfect.
Awesome. So, some housekeeping items before we get started with today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and in the handouts, a PDF of the slides is available. So you don't need to wait for me to email them out to you. You can already access those slides, but I will be emailing out the slides to everyone in attendance within 72 hours after the webinar is over, along with the recording. Throughout the webinar, you can submit your questions in the questions box, and depending on whether they're relevant to what we're talking about at the time or if it's something to wait till the end, I might answer those questions throughout or have one of our presenters answer them, or we might answer them at the end when we will have time to address all of the questions. Also, feel free to join in the conversation on social media at FL College Access using the hashtags FCAN, hashtag FAFSA Challenge, and hashtag FAFSA. Again, for those of you who may not be familiar with Florida College Access Network, we are a statewide organization whose mission is to create and sustain a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career readiness, access, and completion for all students. And our vision is that at least 60% of working age Floridians will hold a high quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025. And when we talk about that high quality post-secondary degree or credential, we're not just talking about bachelor's degrees, but we're also including associate's degrees and workforce certificates, any kind of training beyond high school that prepares a student to get a good job and to be able to make a living wage. And of course, all of those kinds of high quality programs are ones that students can use Pell Grant money that they qualify for by completing a FAFSA. Our work happens in 3 main ways. We have local college access networks, which are place-based organizations and coalitions across the state that bring together people from sectors like education and business and nonprofits who are all committed to working on improving post-secondary completion and attainment. And of course, both Jessica and Doug are members of their local college access networks. We have a team that works on research and policy, and so they work with some of the data around degree attainment and FAFSA completion. We recently released dashboards that have degree attainment and FAFSA completion data for all 50 states, including Florida, so you can take a look at those. And then we have our statewide initiatives, which are statewide programs that focus on helping students make that transition from high school to college. And the 3 main ones we have are Apply Yourself Florida, Florida FAFSA Challenge, and Florida College Decision Day. We are developing a new initiative called Planet Florida, which would encourage students to begin thinking about making plans for what they want to do after high school. And if you are a representative from a high school or a community organization and you want to participate in one of those initiatives, you can go ahead and register at www.floridacollegeaccess.org/initiatives. So for right now, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the specifics of the Florida FAFSA Challenge. So This is the fourth year that we are running the Florida FAFSA Challenge and coordinating it across the state. And it is a challenge that we issue to schools and communities to adopt the goal of increasing their FAFSA completion by 5% over the previous year. And the challenge runs from October 1st to March 31st. October 1st, of course, is the day that FAFSA opens, so make sure that all of your calendars are marked for October 1st. And we end the challenge on March 31st, even though students are able to complete the FAFSA after that time. Actually, they're able to complete it through June for a given school year. We end the challenge on March 31st to encourage communities to work on having students complete the FAFSA early, because financial aid, which students access by completing the FAFSA, is distributed on a first come, first served basis. And students who complete the FAFSA early are more likely to receive the total amount of aid that they could qualify for. So, as you can see in this picture here, FCAN awards folks who do well in FAFSA, schools and districts. For FAFSA champions, those are the schools and districts that achieve that 5% goal, and they all get a certificate showing them that they, acknowledging them for reaching that 5% goal. And then the folks you see there with trophies are the individuals representing schools that we honored last year at our summit who won in the categories of MVP, so those with the highest levels of FAFSA completion, and most improved from large schools and large districts and small districts across the state. And this year we have a new category, which is going to be the FAFSA Innovator Award. And this award is going to recognize those schools and communities who are doing creative, innovative things to try to boost their FAFSA completion. So be on the lookout for our press release that'll be coming out in October that'll explain how that award will work. It'll be on a nomination basis, and you'll be able to nominate folks who you think are doing innovative things, or even nominate yourself, and a committee will review those nominations. A couple of points on FAFSA data in Florida. Florida actually ranks number 3 in the nation out of 50 states and the District of Columbia for the number of students who are eligible to receive a Pell Grant. Now, a Pell Grant, for those of you who may not be familiar, is financial aid that low-income students can receive. The maximum award is $6,095 for the year, and it's a grant, not a loan, so it does not need to be repaid. So Florida is number 3 in the nation for the proportion of students who are eligible for this Pell Grant, but actually 31st in the nation for FAFSA completion. So essentially what that means is that even though Florida has one of the highest rates of eligibility for financial aid, we also have one of the lowest rates for completing the application that is necessary to access that financial aid. And in fact, by June 30th of last year, fewer than 50% of Florida's public school students had completed the FAFSA. And we can see our data from this year versus last year, the number of FAFSAs that were completed and the number that were submitted, and how we changed from last year. Now, our completion rate did go up slightly, which is still a good thing, because FAFSA completion across the nation went down as a whole, but Florida still has work to do when it comes to getting more students to complete the FAFSA so they can access financial aid. But we also want to make sure to emphasize that just completing the FAFSA or submitting a FAFSA is not always enough. In fact, almost 10% of FAFSAs that were submitted in Florida last year were either incomplete or incorrect, which makes Florida the 4th highest in the nation for FAFSA errors. So what this tells us is that our communities are doing a great job of getting down in front of students and getting them to submit that form. But there are some complexities in the form, some systemic barriers that are making it difficult for students to have that form complete and correct. So that is why one of FCAN's policy priorities and advocacy priorities is FAFSA simplification. But it also means that we at FCAN want to do more to support schools and support college access professionals and making sure that those FAFSAs that are submitted are complete and correct. So in the handouts, you'll be able to find a document that we put together based on some data we received from the U.S. Department of Education that goes over the top 4 most common FAFSA mistakes. So we encourage you to use that, print that out, and use that during your FAFSA events when you're working with students to make sure that they're not making those errors. And in fact, if every FAFSA submitted in Florida had been completed last year, we would have exceeded our 5% goal. So this is an important strategy to be taking in the coming year as you're implementing these strategies that Jessica and Doug are going to talk about today to improve FAFSA completion. And finally, we did a webinar last month on verification, which is an additional step that about 50% of low-income students will have to go through after they file the FAFSA to verify with the schools that they're applying to that the income they reported is correct. And so if you're interested in that webinar, you can find that on FCAN's website. It's called FAFSA is Not Enough, and I will also include that link when I send out the recording for this webinar. Finally, we have some other FAFSA resources that I want to make sure that you all are aware of. In the handout section, I have the Florida College Access Network FAFSA Toolkit. And we also, our partners at Future Makers, who Jessica represents, have a wonderful website at futuremakerscoalition.com/FAFSA first. And that website has a lot of one-pagers and worksheets that you could use that answer some of the frequently asked questions and have documents that show parents what they need to bring to the school with them for FAFSA completion events. So that is also very helpful. Like I said, we have the sheet on the top FAFSA mistakes students make. We also have attached a FAFSA verification handout that Jessica created down at Champions for Learning. On FCAN's website, you can find the FAFSA Challenge Data Dashboard, which is right now updated for last year, so you can use that to see what your FAFSA data from last year looks like. By the first week of October, we will have a first look FAFSA Challenge Data Dashboard that will have the raw numbers of FAFSAs completed in your area, and by January, we will have the new FAFSA Challenge dashboard, which will have the FAFSA completion rates. So if you want to stay up to date with those latest resources for FCAN, make sure that you sign up for our mailing list. And then finally, we also do blog posts on FAFSA stories, and which brings me to our next slide, which is that a big part of our advocacy work is sharing these FAFSA stories of students who are either having trouble with completing the form or having trouble with verification, to make sure that we have those stories so that we can share them with policymakers and put the human face and the student face behind these policies to help us in our work. So if you have those stories that you want to share, please contact me at abullock@floridacollegeaccess.org, and I'd be happy to talk with you. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Doug, and he is going to start by talking about the approach that United Way as a community partner takes in improving FAFSA completion in the Tampa Bay area. So Doug, take it away.
All right, thanks, Amy. So my name is Doug Griesenauer. I'm the Director of Workforce Development and Financial Stability here at United Way Suncoast. Our United Way Suncoast covers Hillsborough, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota, and DeSoto areas. But for this presentation, I want to talk to you guys about the work that we've been doing in Hillsborough and Pinellas counties with LEAP. So Amy, can I go to the next slide? And so really when we're talking about what makes a coalition work, I know it sounds a little corny, but a coalition works when all of the pieces of a coalition work together. Really, when we're talking about how we can reduce all of the error rates and increase FAFSA completion, it's something that does take a village. And so this is LEAP Tampa Bay. We merged with a group over in Pinellas just recently. So it's both a Hillsborough Pinellas group with the vision to reach 60% of working age adults in Tampa Bay holding degrees and credentials by 2025, with FAFSA being a key component of this. And if you look on the group, Bank of America leads our group, and the backbone organization, if anyone's familiar with the work of collective impact, the backbone is the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay that makes this happen. But as you see here, we have school districts, we have other entities, other funders, we have the schools themselves, we have higher education groups coming together, essentially making sure that each person can do what they do best, but in a collective. And so if there are United Ways or other community entities along the line, here's the part that United Way works. And so if we can jump onto the next slide. The next slide is how United Way helps. And we do it 4 big ways, really. And so we predominantly work with recruitment of volunteers, as well as reaching other recipients through our other programs. We obviously provide trainings and we share our lessons learned. So again, our 2 big things is recruiting volunteers and then training those volunteers. And the reason that United Way is a good fit for that is because we have a variety of other programs. Anyone who's on the line, if you are a United Way or other community program that does a volunteer income tax assistance program or partners with someone who provides SNAP assistance, any of those sort of pieces allow you to be well trained to recruit and train FAFSA people as well. So keep that in the back of your mind because I'll be covering it in a couple more slides. And so talking about recruitment of volunteers, if we jump into the next slide, we see that really when it works with people, the best way to get volunteers are to have the ones who are already doing it. So like I mentioned, we have volunteer income tax assistance program where we have IRS trained volunteers who provide tax support. Well, VITA season tends to be January through April with a few year-round programs around that. And FAFSA, with our big push in October, lends a lot of credibility to working with the volunteers who will be working with us very seriously in the spring, giving them an opportunity to work with us in the fall. As we know, a lot of the issues around FAFSA completion are around filling out government documents and making sure that they're reporting their income properly. And people who've already been trained in VITA or in tax assistance, they know that stuff, they're confident in it, and so they become already well suited with that. The same as if we work with SNAP partners. We're working with a group here, Feeding Tampa Bay, that works with a lot of their SNAP volunteers. And so we're already starting conversations about, okay, how can those SNAP volunteers also participate in these other programs and vice versa? Because if you know how to fill out a SNAP application, again, a government form, you know how to fill out FAFSA, which again is a government form, right? Government forms tend to be long and complicated. But if you get one, you can start to get a feel for the other ones. And so obviously those are the most beneficial, but we go to the next slide. If those can't be all of your volunteers, a good volunteer really is anyone. The biggest hurdle in getting a good FAFSA volunteer is demystifying the difficulties of FAFSA, right? People tend to get scared because it works with, taxes, it works with income, it's a government document, there's a lot of steps involved. But really, if you can get someone who can follow instructions, then they can complete FAFSA. That being said, of course, the easy sells are those who are already comfortable with FAFSA or government documents. Like I said, your retired individuals are always going to be golden. These are individuals who are willing to put forth the time. And the reason I say this is because individuals, sometimes when you're working with school districts, they'll do FAFSA nights in the evenings, or they'll be doing work at the school during the day. And so if you have somebody who's employed or has variable work schedules, it's going to be hard to make sure that they can fit those. They're retired, it works out great. Same being said, college students are also really good if they're the right ones. That's what we found here at United Way, is that college students, especially those who are completing the FAFSA themselves, have that innate knowledge, they have that connectivity, but make sure that they're volunteering in order to help other people complete the FAFSA. What we found in our experience is if you find college students that sort of just need those 5 hours of volunteer recruitment for XYZ requirement, 2 of those hours are going to be the training itself. And then you're not going to have a lot of time left and you're not going to be able to commit with them. And so again, a good volunteer is anyone, but having that connection, that cross-training with other government documents tends to work well. Next slide. And the part that I find cooler is the value of a cross-aware program, not just a cross-trained volunteer, but a cross-aware program. And I say this because probably anyone who's on the phone, you guys do something in your community regarding FAFSA, or else you wouldn't be on the line. But you probably don't only do FAFSA work. You probably have some connection with other people in your community that do a variety of other things. And the value of having this level of cross-awareness can be really, really beneficial to make sure that we're serving the people we can, right? Amy mentioned that there's this huge discrepancy in Florida of individuals who can be completing these FAFSA applications to get Pell Grants. And so the best way to spread that information is to use the resources we already have in place. And so again, I mentioned the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program because when they come in and they file out their taxes, if you see that they're getting education credits, which you'll see by doing their taxes, you can ask, oh, I see you're doing education credits. Have you filled out the FAFSA? right? It's that easy of a question where the answer should be yes, no matter what, because you have your taxes in front of them. And if the answer is no, you can use that as a warm handoff to connect them with other FAFSA groups. Same true with SNAP recipients completing forms. They're completing information about that. And so just if they talk about college-bound family members, you can bring up the FAFSA. And then likewise, this goes both ways, right? FAFSA clients that you're working with, if they're complaining about the taxes or they're complaining about the IRS portion when you're at that doing a FAFSA training, be aware of some of those community resources you have so that you can say, oh, yeah, taxes, am I right? But let's talk about VITA. Here's a free way to get it done. So again, you can be sharing that knowledge and resources so that everyone can get connected. And the last thing I want to say about the value of cross-aware programs is be aware of adult FAFSA users, which I tend to define just as the non-high school ones, right? We have a lot of really, really good work in high school trying to make sure people complete the FAFSA, and we should. But if you guys have these other programs, be aware that anyone who's going to college has the opportunity to complete a FAFSA. Obviously, their dependency may be an issue or maybe a new situation for them, but they still can complete the FAFSA. And I think sometimes when we look at FAFSA, we're just really hammering high school seniors, which is good and important. But again, if you have these programs, be aware of that so that we can make sure that we increase our rates of adult FAFSA users too here in Florida. So the next slide. And so that is essentially who you should be recruiting and how you should be aware of this. When we're at United Way, we provide trainings to our community. We do it in partnership with individuals from college financial aid staff, and we hold them out in the community. We try to make them in a variety of locations so that people don't have to go too far in order to get trained. Typically, they go somewhere that's familiar to them so that they're not having to go into some convoluted building in order to reach this training. And having the college financial aid staff there is really, really good because they can talk about the really specific stuff. Because our trainings, we have them right now about 2 hours long, but we can make them accordion, longer or shorter. I really wouldn't advocate for too much longer, but sometimes you need to make them shorter. But not all of it really is talking about the details. The first quarter we really do have is gathering buy-in and building confidence among the volunteers. Because if you can get volunteers who buy into the reason why we do FAFSA, the reason why we put this in, some of the stats that Amy gave you in the beginning, I actually include in my trainings as well, because that's what motivates me, right? Like, wow, there is a lot of work we can do in our communities and we can do something about it. So let's work together. The middle 2 quarters is educating on the details of the work and really focusing on those special circumstances. This is where the college financial aid staff comes into play. Because I would say, on a handful, 90% of the people filling out the FAFSA, it's pretty cut and dry. But that 10% you really need to be knowledgeable about, especially if you're working with individuals who may have undocumented parents, if you're working with children who are divorced, but they're living with maybe another family member. Individuals with tricky households are the ones that you're going to spend the most time on. And you'll be working on that. And then with that, the last quarter we have is just practicing. And we expect lots of questions in the work that we do because that's the point, right? That goes back to that first quarter of building that confidence. Make sure people can use this time to ask all of the questions they have. So when they walk out of the training, not only do they know what they're doing, which obviously is important for a training, but even more importantly, they're confident that they know what they're doing. So again, you have volunteers who are committed to the work and are moving it forward. So next slide, I'm going to go through a couple of some of the slides that we have ourselves, just really quickly. I don't want to take up too much of your time about what we do here in Hillsborough. And what I want to say, just as a snapshot of what I'll be mentioning in about 5 minutes, is that all of the slides that I'm going to provide to you are completely up for grabs. The stuff that we've built here are very much open for you guys' use. We want to make sure that you guys can use as much information as possible. And so I'll go through some slides. Feel free to just ask me for them, and I'll have my contact information at the end. We can get that done. But essentially, a typical volunteer training starts with who makes this happen, sharing the partnerships, reiterating the fact that we don't do this alone, because again, it is so important to talk about the value of community in this work. Then setting that stage of why do we care, and then going to the real stuff. Honestly, the 4 big questions people ask are about dependency statuses, who is a parent, talking about undocumented parents or students, and then what counts as income and assets. It is amazing how complicated the what counts as a parent can be in these questions, but people ask real situations that do get tricky. And so we make sure that we tackle that stuff so that all of our volunteers know what's going on. And then finally, we end up with a line-by-line review for people to practice, which I find extremely important, so that the first FAFSA they're completing isn't someone's real FAFSA, because they can get nervous then. All right, so for the next few slides, I'm going to go really quickly, but just want to talk about So here's some examples of what we do here in Hillsborough. So the next slide is really just a graph about as low-income rates rise, FAFSA completion rates go down. So when we talk about where we're targeting our work, we target specific schools that can benefit from this for the most. Obviously, free and reduced price lunch isn't the only stat, but it is one that's of value. And so we look at FAFSA completion rates across the board. At some of our areas are less than half. And so how do we build that up? And so the next slide, we also mentioned that even though some areas have low income rate or low FAFSA rates, the next slide shows that we can do something about it. And so again, here's an example. It's 2 years old, but looking at one of those high schools, Armwood, in which the FAFSA rate was going up a little bit, but then it plateaued around January. But putting in a FAFSA lab can cause that extra jump, that extra influx of what's going on. And so again, we have the data. If this is your first year doing it, I would encourage you to collect the data so that you'll have it for next year. But I mean, this tells our story. This is why volunteers are important, because they actually can do something about these issues, which I find very motivating. And when talking to volunteers, they do too. So the next slide just really talks about how they can help. So specifically in our area, we work with college-wide FAFSA nights, college-hosted FAFSA labs. We can volunteer in individual specific schools for certain reasons. These, of course, change year to year depending on what the need is at the school and as we refine our work. But I do like to use a call to action in the training so that when people are motivated right then and there, they can sign up for what's going on. You really don't want to lag between the information and the motivation and then your call to action. Make sure you put those together. And then the next slide is really talking about that practice, which I want to point out at the end. FAFSA has a demo system. I hope you guys all are aware of this, but fafsademo.test.ed.gov exists, where literally you can go through a FAFSA and quote unquote submit it, but when you submit it, it just goes out into the ether. It doesn't get logged anywhere. And here's an opportunity where you can create as mundane or as complicated of a system as possible and get your volunteers to physically walk through one. When I've been talking with volunteers, sometimes they get worried when you're working with live ammo, so to speak, where you're working with an individual and they don't want to screw it up because they don't want them to not get their Pell eligibility because of something I did, XYZ. This is where you build up their strength to what's going on. The one note, if you do go into FAFSA demo, this is just something that I would share from my experience because I made this mistake a couple times before, is there will be dates of birth for information. Make sure your date of birth and the individual that you're working with is under 18, or else they automatically become an independent student and then it makes everything messy. So just deal with that when you take care of the practice. And then the last thing I want to share just at the end of my allotted time is that I am here to help. And I really do want to see, I see you got 124 people here attending this webinar. If 124 people email me, I will be genuinely excited. I really do want to share this information and share alike. I feel like we as a state can only do good work if we're all collaborating together and if we're all sharing our best practices and sharing our resources like this webinar right now. And so if you guys have questions or thoughts, I've actually provided an online FAFSA training where I walk through my training. It's about an hour, 10 minutes. It's up on YouTube, but we have that link there. My slides are always up for grabs. Just ask. Here's my website or my email address, dgreesenauer@uwsuncoast.org, and I think Amy will be sending that out later as well. And then lastly, I'm happy to work with other communities. Sometimes it's nice when United Ways, they're speaking to United Ways, we can share our lingo, so to speak. And so I'm happy to talk with any United Way specifically about how you can work with your FCAN, or if you don't have, or your LCAN, or if you don't have an LCAN, how you can work to build FAFSA work. But of course, it's not United Way specific either. If you're any entity that's just interested in partnering, again, like I said, with LCAN or with your community, I am happy to help build this out. So here's my information, and do what you will with it. And so again, that's my section, really just reiterating the fact that it takes a community to get this done. But if you can build on the strengths you already have, as well as tackling some of the more sensitive pieces of your training, you can get a really good group of committed volunteers that can get a lot done for your community.
Thank you so much, Doug. And we'll be going over all of that contact information and those links at the end. So if you missed it, don't worry, we'll have it for you again. So now we're going to hand things over to Jessica, so Doug talked about the way that a community organization is really helping to drive FAFSA training in the Tampa Bay area. Jessica is going to show kind of a case study of how in Collier County they're implementing this to make this happen. So Jessica, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you so much, Doug, for explaining the United Way. That's a really great model, and I think everybody got some great takeaways from that. Amy, we can go ahead and start on the next slide. So I'm speaking as a representative, and I work for Champions for Learning, which is also, as Amy said in the beginning, part of Future Ready Collier. And really, we're a network of over 60 organizations that help to make sure that every child is ready for kindergarten. And then where I kind of come in is helping also to get them ready for a plan for after high school and a vision to make sure that they get there. So a lot of my work lies in that college access piece. And really this network has come together over the last couple of years, and with our school district really being a key partner in that and helping us all to come together around certain initiatives for that support. And then on the next slide, and Amy kind of alluded to this earlier, how we then connect into future makers in that Southwest Florida region to make sure that our goals and our initiatives are all lining up not only within Collier, but within our 5-county regions through future makers, and then also with FCAN, so we're all having the same alignment to help increase the number of college degrees and certificates. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about some resources that are available, and then some of the things that we have done in Collier that have really helped to move the needle or start moving the needle on FAFSA completion, and some of the strategies that we've started using and seeing some great results in. So on the next slide, we have the Collier County Public Schools website. And I started with this because this is a great repository, and again, where that partnership is this is a great illustration of our partnership, because we can direct all students and families to one resource, and all of the network partners help to vet the information that's on this site, and it's continuously updated. So parents and students and families have a great resource that's there, and we'll talk about some of the events, but everything that we've done throughout the community, whether it's Champions for Learning, or whether it's another partner organization, or whether it's something that has been a district-wide event, it all helps to drive students and parents to the same place. And one of the great things about that is that then they're getting a consistent message. So no matter where the student goes, they're getting kind of the same answer and the same resources. So on the left-hand side, it does a great job of kind of pulling out what those resources are around scholarships, including Bright Futures. And one of the reasons we wanted to make sure we had that on there, and there'll be an update to this site very soon, is because with the Florida financial aid application also opening on October 1st, we want to have a really clear and consistent message, so students and families don't think, oh, I did the FAFSA or I did the Florida financial aid application. They did one and they're done. They really have to do both to ensure they're maximizing their eligibility for aid, not only at a federal level, but also a state level for all of those different opportunities. So that is, again, a great place to be able to kind of share that message. Then also on the right-hand side are those FAFSA resources, how to set up an FSA ID, the 6 easy steps that the Department of Education has put together, and we share those in English, Spanish, and Creole. We try to do that with a lot of our resource documents that are being shared out to families and students, so that way, if there is a language barrier, the student can help the parent to get their FSA ID set up, and the FAFSA is now available in multiple languages as well, so that language doesn't become a barrier to that student being able to complete the application. Also on here is the resources for FAFSA completion events and other support mechanisms for the students and families as they move through from FSA IDs opening to the actual completion events for FAFSA, which we'll take a look at in just a few minutes. On the next slide, this is something we started sharing with students and families because, as Amy mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, with 10% of FAFSAs being submitted in 2018, the state of Florida either having it being incomplete or having errors, looking at how can we prevent those errors from happening in the first place is a really big point for our students. So looking at that and where those errors were coming from, we were noticing a group of questions on the FAFSA that were consistently causing the students to be ineligible for aid or flagging them. So we answered these questions and shared this slide openly as kind of a cheat sheet for any high school senior to the questions that should most likely be the answers for those students. So I just want to take a minute and go through those really quick. What will your high school completion status be when you begin college? So most students are going to graduate with a high school diploma. That's a pretty standard. What will your college grade level be when you begin college? So for every student, it should be never attended college first year. And a lot of people or a lot of students will say, well, wait, I did dual enrollment, or I did do an AP class, which I'm getting college credit for. Even those classes, because they haven't officially matriculated into a college yet, they're considered a first-time student. So this is really important for the eligibility of aid to be considered a first-time student, that they're answering that question correctly. And on the next one, what degree or certificate will you be working on? It's very important here that they're entering a first bachelor's degree or lower. So a certificate or technical degree, an associate's of sciences, associates of arts, or a first bachelor's degree. Because even though their aspiration may be that they want to be a doctor, that's great, but they won't be working on that doctoral degree right when they begin the 1920 school year. They'll be working on one of those lesser degrees, which is very important because if they select anything above a first bachelor's degree, so a second bachelor's degree or higher, they would no longer be considered eligible for the federal Pell Grant. So one of the largest sources of money would be cut off, but just by answering that question incorrectly. Then next, are you interested in being considered for work study? I tell every student to answer this question. Yes, it doesn't guarantee you a job, but it does give you that opportunity if you decide you do need to work and you do meet the requirements for that institution, to where you could have another source of assistance that would be available for you. And then finally, will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin? Again, this is one of those eligibility yes or no questions. If they were to answer yes, it would automatically exclude them from being eligible for the federal Pell Grant and some state aid. So very important they're answering no, because some students may have an associate's degree, but most likely would not have that bachelor's degree completed. And just some notes, we have received some communication from the Department of Education on the 1920 FAFSA. There's going to be some new grouping on how these questions are put together. So also there used to be a help and hints information box on the right-hand side, and that's going to be replaced by a tooltip section, which is they are saying is also going to update for every question, but the box and the information is just going to look a little bit different. And as Doug mentioned, that demo site is really a fantastic resource to use, and they have announced that the demo site for the 1920 FAFSA will be available at the end of September. So just to note that right now, if you were to go on the demo site, it would be the 1819 FAFSA that you could access. So then also from this, we took and put together some tips for Florida students on the next slide. So really important that students list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. So a lot of students think, well, I don't want to include a school I haven't applied to yet. It's really important that they're putting every school that they think they may remotely apply to. They don't have to have applied. They don't have to have been accepted to that school to put it on their FAFSA. And I always tell students, think about it. Every time you have to go back in and make a correction on that FAFSA, you are potentially, maybe selected for verification, or you could potentially select a wrong button and create an error. So as Amy mentioned in the beginning with the selection of verification, you want to minimize the correction, the times that you're going into your FAFSA and making corrections. Also, it's very important in the state of Florida that a student list a Florida public state university or college first to ensure their eligibility for state aid. And that rule varies from state to state, but in Florida, they do need to list that public state college first to ensure their eligibility. Students also often get very concerned about this because their number one pick may be out of state, but remind them that students can't see the order of the schools on the FAFSA, nor can they see the other schools that they've listed on the FAFSA. That information is completely confidential to that student. Now, some of the ways that we've taken this information and helped to really work in our community to be strategic about helping students not only get that FAFSA ID, but then also get the FAFSA done, because we know October 1st comes so quickly during that senior year that we started aligning some of the events and helping the district align and support some of those events that a student goes through during their senior year before the FAFSA actually opens on October 1st. So on the next slide, we have a great example of that, which was our district-wide financial aid night. And this started actually last year as a result of Hurricane Irma, who disrupted almost all of our financial aid nights across the district. And it gave us a great opportunity to align those events and do one night virtually. So there's one location, and the other schools, the students and families can go to watch that information. It's supported by our higher education partners that share the information, as well as our community foundation that shares scholarship resources and information. But one of the great things we started doing at this is having that FAFSA ID lab. So an hour before the actual presentation, every single location becomes an FAFSA ID lab, where our partners through our LCAN help to lead that FAFSA ID lab and have volunteers that can help students and families come through that lab. They have the resource of the 6 steps to create their FAFSA ID to help a student figure out which parent they should be using on the FAFSA, and a resource to help them to determine if they should be considered dependent or independent. So a really great opportunity to get a crack at getting some FAFSA IDs done several weeks before FAFSA opens. And then this is also recorded and put onto that district website, which we shared in the beginning, so students and families have that resource that they can continue to refer back to. Then after this event, students will continue to have access and opportunities to complete their FAFSA ID in different classes, usually an English language arts class throughout the district. Then a few days after this event, on the next slide, we have our district-wide college night. So that's, of course, probably everybody on the call has a college night in their area. And, it's just that traditional college expo of all of the local and state and national colleges coming and setting up for students and families to visit. And we've always had a great turnout to this in our district. And so 2 things that we started doing at this college night. One is we started a couple years ago having a financial aid help desk, because we realized with the financial aid night being a couple days prior to this, students may be coming along with questions, or how do you get scholarships, or what about this on the FAFSA. So using our higher education partners, they set up a financial aid help desk with their financial aid offices so that students and families can ask questions at those desks, rather than trying to ask those questions to an admissions representative in the normal expo space. So that's worked very well. Also, this past year, we just had an FAFSA ID lab. We added the FAFSA ID lab to this event as well. So as students and families came through and we were seeing seniors, we could direct them to the FAFSA ID lab if they hadn't set up that during financial aid night or a previous time. So really, again, in every opportunity to share not only the information and the support, but also to get that FAFSA ID done is really being taken advantage of. And then also, one of the great things our district did, and you can see on the website, was this year they opened and did a registration for the night. So they had a good idea of what students were coming, what parents were coming, what grade levels were coming, and they did that registration through Naviance. So again, kind of linking those different tools. Our district made a great investment in purchasing Naviance for all students in high school and middle school in Collier County. So they have access to this resource, which is a great tool, again, to connect back and share information and resources through, but a great way also to capture the students that would be attending. Then post-college night, after that, then we also on the next slide have our FAFSA completion event. So this is really, our FAFSA completion events have grown from what used to be the old College Goal Sundays and have evolved, and we do them district-wide. So Collier County's geography is very widespread. But again, using Future Ready Collier partners, we come together and help the district to strategically look at what sites make sense on what days. And so this year, this is a brand new flyer for us, and we're really excited. But our FAFSA completion events, much like Doug was mentioning, are volunteer-driven. We engage our higher education partners to really be those FAFSA experts in the room. And then we utilize a web-based training for those volunteers ahead of those events so that they feel comfortable the day of the event. And one of the things we really took a lot of time doing this year was updating this flyer to make it seem a little bit less intimidating. So what you need to do before the event, here's 3 to 5 things to do 3 to 5 days before the event. And then also here's the 4 things you need to bring to the event. So really trying to simplify that and give students to make it feel like it's not so cumbersome and scary to fill out the FAFSA. And then on the next slide is one of the new resources that's going to be available this year with FAFSA, which is the mobile app. So this will give, this is a great opportunity to give access to students who may not have a personal computer, and they can download the app from FSA and it will stay on their phone that way, which is a great opportunity to, whether it's setting up an FSA ID or completing the FAFSA or making a correction so that they'll continue to have access, even though they may not have a computer in front of them. One of the comments that we have been hearing from Department of Education or direction is that the question order on the mobile app, though, is going to be very different from that on the computer. So a student wouldn't be able to be using the mobile app and then following on the computer or vice versa. It's going to be a very different grouping of questions between the 2 versions. And as you can see on the screenshot there of the phone, you're only going to see maybe 1 to 2 questions at a time before you're having to hit the next and previous button. But the other great thing about this app is that students can edit and manage their FSA ID from here. So it will really help to manage the students, or to manage the usernames and passwords, which oftentimes students forget. Also, they'll be able to view their loan and aid history as they go through college. And if they were to get an error message that says to contact FSA or Federal Student Aid, they would be able to do that right through the mobile app. So again, another resource that they'll be able to access right through their phone to respond quickly to take care of anything that needs to be resolved, to either get their FSA ID cleared or to get their FAFSA cleared, even though they may not necessarily have computer access. And then my final slide, I just wanted to share the website for Future Ready Collier, and we have posted our report to the community, which shows a lot of the great work that we were able to accomplish last year, even in spite of Hurricane Irma, and looking forward to the future and all the great things that us and our partners will be able to accomplish because we're better together. And there's the website, so you can take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I thought I was unmuted and I was not. I just want to go ahead and thank Jessica and Doug one more time for sharing with us today before I get into some of our questions. And also before I get into the questions, I want to go ahead and plug our next webinar, which will be coming up on Tuesday, October 2nd. This one is going to be called Meet Alice, a look at Florida's financially struggling population and how communities are using data for change. And this is another United Way initiative here. And ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. And so these are folks who are working, but who are unable to afford the basic needs of a family budget. All right, so questions. I have a couple that I'll get to first that are FCAN related. So we had someone ask where we get our stats for Pell eligibility. These are available only at the state level. So if you're looking for your Pell eligibility at a specific district level or county level, we won't be able to access data for that. But if you're interested in the Pell eligibility rates at the state level, you can find it in our new FAFSA state level dashboard. And there you can also download the corresponding data file. We had another question as to where on our FAFSA tracker dashboard, where do we get the number of high school graduates? It's a great question. We get that from the WICHE High School Graduate Projections. And if you ever have specific questions about our data, you can email our Senior Research Associate, Kimberly Lent, at krlent at Florida College. I'm sorry, that's the wrong email. krlent at usf.edu, or you can email me and I'll put you in touch with Kimberly. So, Doug, there was a question about FAFSA training. Someone wanted to know how to sign up to be trained to become a FAFSA volunteer. Now, of course, I know that you can only talk about Tampa. So if you want to talk about, I don't know if there are some trainings that you have available, but then also where they can find that training online.
Yeah, so if you happen to be lucky enough to be in the Hillsborough Pinellas area or nearby, we provided trainings last weekend, this weekend, and next weekend. So obviously September is the training time, as October is the action time. So if you live near us, let me know. I'm actually providing a training this Saturday at United Way Suncoast's office. That will be this Saturday, the 22nd, from 9 to 11. At 5201 West Kennedy. But if you don't live near Hillsborough or Pinellas and don't want to drive here, there is that website. So actually, if you just jump onto YouTube, you can do just Google Hillsborough, Florida FAFSA training United Way. And pop up. Hopefully there will be a voice very similar to mine because it's me providing that training, which should get you what you want. But like I said, there's an hour and 10-minute training. I like in-person ones better because you can answer direct questions, but that will have all the content you need. Again, if you just use that YouTube video.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. And the next question I have a feeling is going to be a Jessica question. Jessica, we have someone who writes that they have students whose parents had an FSA ID in the past and they've then forgotten the password. And when they attempted to call the FSA help department, they were not able to reset the password. And so I'm wondering if you would know what would be some of the reasons that would block a student or parent from getting a new password or resetting a password.
So that is a great question and one that we definitely see very often. And one of the reasons we see that question very often is we find that students have an older sibling that has gone to college and created an FSA ID for mom and dad and didn't tell mom or dad that FSA ID or the email that they used to set up that FSA ID. So then what happens, because the parent can't figure out what email that is when they call the FSA ID number, they won't unlock it or release it to the parent. So usually it's that an older sibling has done that with a different email. So first would be contact the older sibling, find out what that email is, and then call back 1-800-4FED-AIDS. So that's FEDAID, and ask to speak to someone to get the account unlocked and explain what's happened. Obviously, they don't want a student creating a FSA ID for a parent because technically you're attesting that that is you and that is your social security number and that is your personal email address. But we know that there are students that have to do that for their parents and vice versa. So it's really important that they're, one, writing down that information, and then two, if they have older siblings, that they're contacting them and sharing that information accordingly.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And we have another question that is going to be for you. What happens if dependent students have undocumented parents, but they themselves are U.S. citizens?
Fabulous question. This is probably my favorite FAFSA question, if there could be one, because their parents' citizenship status does not affect the student's eligibility. So a student's eligibility is solely based on their own citizenship, not their parents. If the parents are not citizens or don't have a social security number, they will not be able to create an FSA ID, and that's okay. When they go into the FAFSA, they're going to put all zeros for their social security number. When it asks what state they're a resident of, they're going to select foreign country. And then when they get to the final page of this FAFSA to select submit, they're not going to be able to sign electronically like the student will with having an FSA ID. So they're going to print out a signature page, physically sign that piece of paper, and mail it in. So again, the parent's citizenship status has no bearing on the eligibility for that student.
Thank you, Jessica. And we have one more question. Oh, here we go. What happens when student and parent, both students and parents are undocumented and there is no income?
Okay, so if both student and parent are undocumented, what we would recommend, so it's going to vary a little bit from school to school, especially in Florida. Here locally, so our local colleges ask a student to still fill out a FAFSA because they use that as a federal document or attestation that that student is undocumented. So in Florida, they use that as proof to be able to provide them in-state tuition. But it's best to work with that local institution because it's going to vary.
All right, great. All right, we have a lot of people have questions about undocumented students, Jessica, so thank you for answering these. So I think that you might have answered this, but the question is, if the parents are undocumented but they reside in Florida, I think that would be the same as what you were saying before, correct?
Correct. So the student's eligibility would not be affected by this parents not being undocumented. They'll just sign a signature page and submit the FAFSA electronically, and then mail in the signature page with the parent's signature.
And then I think the other part of that question is, when we were talking before, you said that sometimes there are special cases where maybe one of the parents is no longer residing in the country. What would happen in that circumstance?
Okay, so good question. That is a little bit more tricky. So if there are two parents, one's no longer living in the country, usually what they'll do is have that student convert income that parent is making into US dollars and put it into the FAFSA, if that's the biological parent, if that's still the legal guardian. Some schools, depending upon the situation, if both parents live out of the country, that school system school district may deem that student homeless or at risk of being homeless, in which case they would have a dependency override and be considered independent and not needing the parent's information. So there's a few more questions that would kind of have to go along with that student, and I'm happy to follow up if you want to connect with me afterwards to try to get you those resources in your community.
That's great. And we have a couple other questions, but they're a little bit more involved, so we'll reach out to those folks directly if your question did not get answered. And oh wait, here's one more that just came in that's a little bit less involved that we can answer quickly. So how does a student fill out a FAFSA if they're undocumented, since you have to put a social security number or a permanent resident number at the beginning?
Correct. So if they don't have a social, they don't have a permanent resident, they don't have an alien registration, they're going to put their information in there. They're going to hit save, or if it will let it submit. Sometimes you have to hit continue, even though it's flagging an error, and after 3 times they'll go through. It will sit there with an error, but the school, because they're putting a school code on there, the institution can see that a FAFSA has been submitted, and they're really using that as a federal document that you're attesting that you don't have citizenship to be able to provide you in-state tuition on.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right. So like I said, if your question was not answered, we will be reaching out to you individually. You can download the slides from here. We will also be reaching out soon with the recording and the slides within the next 72 hours. So thank you again, Doug and Jessica. And folks, if you have more questions, feel free to email any of us. Thank you. Have a great day.